Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for coming back to listening in. The National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society podcast. In this series, we want to give you the opportunity to listen in to some of the conversations that we're lucky enough to have every day. That is, with a variety of people and organisations all working in the field of mental health and well-being. In this episode, we are joined by Stuart Watson, music therapist and clinical lead of Melody, one of the leading music therapy providers in Northern Ireland. And what an uplifting and fascinating conversation we had. Stuart explains that from the cradle to the grave, music therapy can support people in a way that talking therapy is not always able. It can create bonds between parent and infant. It can connect in a unique way with non-verbal people. It can offer comfort to people with dementia or to those at the end of their lives, using the power of music and the framework of psychodynamic principles underpinning the work. Music is its own language through which we can communicate, understand each other, and build relationships upon. Stuart says it conveys the message, I hear you. I hear you, and I'm here for you. And of course, this is the most powerful message of all between people, regardless how it's conveyed. I suppose that the best place to start, if it's okay, Stuart, is just a little about you and your background and how you've ended up doing this. I was thinking about it this morning, actually. Do I imagine that it starts with a love of music and that transforms into how to use that? I don't know.
Yeah, I would imagine so. For the most music therapists, I would imagine it starts with the love for music. This is more because you're probably more interested in music when you're 8 years old than therapy. Exactly. I would imagine, for the most of us anyway. So I suppose I grew up going to classical lessons and whatnot and got a real passion for music. And then I was in a special needs school here in Northern Ireland working as a classroom assistant and just loved seeing the music have an impact on the young people with motivation for engagement and just seeing how music brought some kids to life, whereas maybe other means of communication didn't. So that was kind of my first experience of using music maybe functionally rather than just, expressively or for enjoyment.
But quite informally, do you mean almost? That you were just... Because I don't know, your instrument is... What do you play?
So at the special school, it was using the trumpet. So I was using the trumpet just to engage and interact with the young people. It wasn't music therapy at this stage. This is just me in my role as a classroom assistant, bringing my own music and bringing me into the role.
I understand. And then just in a very organic way, you were watching the reaction and the response the children were having to it. Okay.
And that was my first kind of glimpse into the power of music to be used. I didn't know the words, but clinically, I suppose, or to be used functionally or to be used with purpose back then. But it wasn't until I went to America, I had my own wee healing journey where I had a lot just to process myself. I had to take myself out of the country to do that. And that's where my love of therapy kind of grew as I got to know who I am, explore my own little children and let them speak. And then when I came back from 2 years in America, that's when, I remember seeing a music therapist before and it just clicked, music and therapy. Let's do this. Let's put this together. And that started me on my road then to training in music therapy. So yes, for me, the music came first and then the therapy and the understanding and the passion for therapy and seeing the power of it and kind of just seeing you become who you're supposed to be through doing a little bit of work on yourself. I fell in love with that idea.
What a lovely way to put it. And actually, I know we will come on in a moment to probably sort of talking then about the differences between talking therapy, as I and many of the people that listen to us will be familiar with, and obviously music therapy. But interestingly, that's quite a common link, I think, that many of us that train as therapists will often come to do that as a result of our own experiences as clients ourselves. You hear it over and over again, what made you decide to train? What made you decide to become a counsellor, a psychotherapist? And it will be, well, we were sat on the other side and experienced how transformative it can be. So clearly that was really a similar experience with you.
Absolutely, just seeing the impact. I suppose for me, it started just with journaling, and then that led to deeper questions. And as I got to know myself more, there was things I just couldn't piece together. So that's when I went to formal therapy, psychotherapy, and then just really went on a whole journey then that brought me to this place of, yes, this is something that I need more of in my life, and also I want to bring to other people and to support them.
So you came back from the US and made this, sounds like a pretty significant decision about what you wanted to do next in your life. So if it's not a really stupid question, Stuart, how does one go about training as a music therapist, and what does that training involve?
I had to ask myself that question too. Because at the time, I had no idea. So I looked into it. It is a master's course, and it has to be a master's course in one of, I think there's about 7 or 8 universities across the UK that offer this course. It's not yet in Northern Ireland, but I hear it is coming. So that's very exciting for Northern Irish and people in Northern Ireland. But yeah, so I went across to Queen Margaret University. It's a 2 years full-time master's or 3 years part-time master's. And obviously you have to have your undergrad. Most have undergrads in music, but we are developing the profession that it's not just music as an undergrad. Some in our course had English as a background, but you just have to have a proficiency in music. If we're going to make music and respond to people musically, there needs to be a high level of a proficiency in your own musicking. But yes, it's a 2 years master's or 3 year part-time.
And how proficient do you have to be in a particular instrument to be able to qualify in that sense?
That's a good question. It probably is listed in our standards of proficiency, but off the top of my head, I think to be able to communicate through music is probably one of the main things. To be able to respond musically to another using an instrument. For example, can you be proficient on the drum, or as in like a hand drum? It's just using it improvisationally to respond to another person or to communicate your own emotions. Obviously, the greater the proficiency you have on, let's say, the piano, the more creative you're going to be able to do with your expression, and the more responsive you'll be able to receive what someone is bringing in a session and replay that to them more accurately or expressionally on an instrument if you have a higher proficiency in it. So yes, the greater the proficiency, the more easier it is to communicate. But it's there still has to, it's not like we require gradient. Now some universities might, but it's not across the board.
That's so interesting. I really understand what you mean by that, in terms of the more proficient you are, the more then you can step out of those, for want of a better word, rules and boundaries and formats, and just start bringing in that creativity. And I suppose a word I imagine in music therapy, as much as it is in talking therapy, is that empathy, isn't it? That responsiveness to somebody else's emotional world, and then being able to react to that with an instrument. That's so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you can play a piece 50 different ways, but it's the same music. But it's all about, as you say, empathetically how you express it. And as not every person's the same. So when they come into our therapy room, we have, even if there are some with the similar issues, you're going to respond differently to how that person is perceiving them and experiencing them.
Yeah. And so do you mind me asking, if we come back to the training then, Stuart, so most people are then going on to an MA course. They already have whatever level of proficiency is required in terms of their music abilities. What else then does the course train you to be able to do? Because again, I'm coming at this very much with that very that very basic understanding of what we know as core training in counselling and psychotherapy, and wonder whether that's a similar thing then that you will be learning, or whether that is something very different.
No, I would imagine there are definitely crossovers and similarities. I suppose there's three main things that we learn. The first would be exploring what music means to you as a person, and how do you communicate music, how do you express yourself, and learning the different ways of improvising, so that it's not just playing a piece with a client, but how to actually use music functionally and a little bit different to what you're used to out of the box, so that when it comes to a clinical setting, you have much more freedom of expression to meet with your client and to match and mirror, who they are in the moment, and just to work with them. So that's a big kind of learning, because a lot of classical trained musicians anyway train classically, so they learn pieces, and it can be quite rigid. So just breaking out of your own comfort and going off beat, even not just playing a very straight rhythm, but so there's all that to break down and relearn different ways of making music, and what does actually music mean. So that is a big part of the course, and that really helps you connect with people through music. Then the other side of the course is and that is therapeutic in itself. But then we've got a lot of training in psychoanalysis. So the majority of music therapists will take their theory from concepts and principles in psychoanalysis, such as object relations, countertransference relationships, attachment theory, and different things. So we'll learn the core concepts within psychoanalysis. And one of the things that we did in our course quite a lot was psychodynamic working with unconscious processes, because a lot of the clients that we can work with are nonverbal. So it's looking at their unconscious processes. How are they making music? I'll get into that, I suppose, a little bit later, but that would be the other part of our course. And then the third part of our course would also be child development, because we work with a lot with SEN and learning disabilities. It's just what is the progression of development? How can we then come alongside in that in music therapy and work developmentally as well as psychotherapeutically?
That's absolutely fascinating, and it helps me understand, like you say, we'll come on to that in a second, about working with non-verbal clients, or is it clients? Is that the term you would actually use?
Traditionally clients, but it's where our language is changing more just to people. As I'm sure yourselves, it's there's big moves and power dynamics and whatnot to try and create that even relationship. But typically traditionally clients, and for the sake of this conversation, maybe just stick to clients, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, whatever seems right for you, I think is what I would say. And another potentially stupid question, does it tend to mostly work with, I don't mean work as in how effective it is, but I mean in terms of the people you work with, will it tend to be children, young people more, or is music therapy appropriate also for adults?
No, it's very much appropriate for adults.
Okay.
It's across all the ages. So you've got some music therapists working in neonatal, right at the very, very early stages of life. And then you've got, you're working with, sometimes you might be working with mummies and their babies, trying to build attachment and bonding. If they maybe haven't experienced a particularly good bonding themselves, and maybe it's not intrinsic to who they are. Then you could be working with adults in rehabilitation, if someone's experienced a stroke, a brain injury, or if you're just generally struggling with your mental health. And then right to the end of life, you've got people with dementia, or just end of life care in hospice, and you're just providing a means of expression or to communicate your last thoughts. And so we go right from start to end of life. I suppose that's the beauty of music, is music transcends age. It transcends so many barriers. And that's, if we can clinically harness that power of music, it really opens the population of who can attend therapy.
What a beautiful thing, and how incredible that it goes as far sort of into those early stages of somebody's life with neonatal work, as you put it, all the way through. And of course, we know things like dementia and how responsive that is to music. Never mind, end of life care, which is certainly a background that I have, end of life care. So working in palliative work, so I can really see and understand that. And so, just to make it clear for people who are listening, so I'm speaking to you at the moment, you're in a school, and I know that's where the majority of your work takes place, is with children and young people. So was there a particular reason why you personally chose to work with that demographic, or did that just sort of unfold and you find yourself in this place sort of in a much more organic, natural way?
A little bit of both. It probably happened organically. In Northern Ireland, there's probably a little bit more work in schools, or I suppose we're still building awareness of what music therapy is, which is why I do it in the likes of these conversations are great, because we can build awareness. But your SEN schools are very aware of the power and the benefits of music therapy. So they're always looking for music therapists to come in. So I suppose when I graduated, organically, I naturally went across to SEN schools because there was openings available.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I've just fallen in love with the work, and I really love seeing when you get responses from a child that maybe wouldn't typically give a response to other means, and how you can then work therapeutically with them. And I know, just these children might not have access to counselling because they may be nonverbal, or they may just not be able to have that type of conversation. So to be able to come alongside a child who's been through trauma, or who's in the care system, or has just had a really hard family upbringing, or an experience of bereavement, and give them a means of, I want to process this with someone. I've really fallen in love with that idea that we can be that processor with them, that we can be that support.
Oh, isn't it wonderful to be able to do something like that? And I think it's really important for people like myself who work in talking therapies to really be mindful of the fact that it isn't for everybody, for whatever reason. And so the fact that there is play therapy or music therapy or all manner of different approaches and ways that we can touch the heart of somebody, or reach their heart, reach their soul, I know is a phrase you've used, and help them, as you put it earlier, know themselves better, or release some of that trauma, whatever that might be, process these things. It's really important to be mindful it isn't always talking therapy that's the right or appropriate thing. So this is such a lovely reminder for us to hear you describing, and you always, I know we've only spoken a few times before, Stuart, but you always describe it, and I can tell you're almost sort of champing at the bit now to come on to the part where we talk about the actual work, which is just so lovely because it says everything about how you feel about it. And it's lovely to know that people that will listen to this will have that knowledge and awareness of it through you in that sense. So thank you for that. So I'm gonna ask you one more question, and then I promise you we'll come on to the sort of the actual work side of it, the day in the life of you as a music therapist. But it's really important for us to acknowledge that I've met you. I know you because you work for Make a Melody, which offers music therapy in Northern Ireland. So is it okay to just check and ask a little bit about what Make a Melody is, how that came about, and exactly what Make a Melody does?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been a businessman. I've always had my own business from a young age. It started with eggs, selling chicken eggs that I had 50p a box. So people were getting a bargain. I would cycle around the country and deliver my eggs. So I've always wanted to own my own business. That part of me has always been quite strong, which is usually quite not as typical with therapy working, because most therapists prefer not to have to do administration or as much of it, but I do thrive in that world as well of administration. So whenever I graduated, I did work for a little bit employed, but my heart was just, I want to start my own business and just, or like create something. So that's where Make a Melody. It was established in 2021, and it was just myself. And very slowly for the first 2 years, we just grew our numbers. And right now we have 13 on staff. There's 5 music therapists, 2 art therapists, and the rest are counsellors. So there's actually a lovely team now that we've created, and it's lovely because we all come from different backgrounds. We have different specialities, different ways of working. So team meetings are lovely actually when we get together, because we have all coming from very different angles.
That's extraordinary. Very conscious that that's going through the pandemic as well. And you've grown so much in that time. And of course, I know that the reason we met is because you then won the contract through the Education Authority of Northern Ireland to provide therapy in schools. So you've done something extraordinary in a relatively short amount of time.
Do you know what it's... Whenever you just go from you to another person, you very quickly realize that you do not have policies in place. So it's been an awful lot of work whenever we just expanded that took that big step and expanded, because if you have 1,000 people or 1 people working in a company, it's the same policies. You still need to have your safeguards in place. And what happens if a child is self-harming, what's the policy, what's the thoughts to protect the child, to protect you as a member of the team, to protect everyone in that situation. So yeah. It's been a lot of work, but I've loved it. I really have loved it, but I'm ready to expand maybe the administrative team as well. So it's not just myself and my wife working in the evenings away at the laptops.
I was just going to say, well, it's a good job you clearly love the admin side of things. Which, like you say, many of us don't.
The whole job in itself at the moment.
Well, it's amazing that's where you've come from, eggs all the way through to starting your own business and now surrounded by this wonderful team. So I feel like I probably am just going to ask one question and then I'm just going to sit back and just let you roll with it, because I've got a funny feeling that's what might happen. Is there any way you can help us understand, whether that's what a day in the life of a music therapist might look like, or perhaps just painting a picture of if we were a fly on the wall looking in on a music therapy session, how that might start, with of course that understanding that's going to, every single session's going to be different depending on who you're working with, but any way you can give us a sense of what actually happens, and I suppose perhaps even what you're hoping to happen.
Yes. Gosh, it's one of those questions. Where do you even begin?
Honestly, anywhere. I'm going to just let you roll with it.
I'll share, yeah. I suppose with music therapy, as with talking therapies too, it's going to look very different with the person that's in front of you. And I suppose that's even maybe more with music therapy because we have such a diverse range of people that we work with. So if you have a mummy and her baby in front of you, that's going to look very different if you have a 12-year-old young person with ASD and ADHD. It might be different than if you've got a 17-year-old neurotypical young person who is struggling with anxiety and image and identity. To then all the way forward to if you have a 48-year-old who's in rehabilitation from having a stroke, so it's going to look very different. But one of the main elements that kind of goes across the board is a musical term called improvisation. Mm-hmm. Improvisation, it's kind of, we use it in every other language as well, but in music it just means something that has not been created before, and it's created in the here and now. And that's a big phrase that we use in counselling and therapy, is the here and now, that you're present with your client, with the person in front of you, and you improvise together. So whenever a person walks into our therapy room, And I suppose to describe improvisation is the lovely thing about music, that it's, the person doesn't need to have musical abilities. So that's why we'll typically have, depending on their age and where they're at, we'll have a range of instruments accessible to them. So I'll maybe better use an example actually of my own work. So let's just take a child who lives with autism that comes into a session. So I'm not expecting them to learn the piano or learn an instrument, but they'll come in, and just through the process of being with and observing, I'll get a really good feel. And just as we talked about earlier, that empathy, I'll get a good feel of where that person is in that day. If this child, let's say, is non-verbal, so they can't tell me how they're doing, they can't talk to me about their week, all they can show me is who they are in that moment and how they're responding. I like to describe musical improvisation as, if you have a good friend and you walk into their house and you see them sitting on a sofa, and if they're having a bad day, they are sitting there, my arms might be folded, their body language is down, there's an energy in the room of just lowness, and if you're empathetic and connected, you'll feel that immediately. And when you approach them, everything about your body language will begin to morph into maybe a resemblance of theirs. And that's a kind of, I'm coming to you, I'm coming to be with you, and I'm going to sit here with you in the here and now in what you're experiencing. Your tone of voice will change. You'll be like, how are you? Whereas if you don't maybe pick up on all those very, very subtle cues, you'll come in, you're like, hello, and you'll be, clapping your hands and whatever, and you'll instantly get this guard. Normally speaking, the person will just, I can't even be in the same room as you right now. So in improvisation and in music, whenever we meet with a person, our music will begin to morph and mold into the cues and the unconscious processes, and whatever is happening with that young person, we will just begin to mold and meet them where they're at. And then in that place, we're in the music, we're saying, I hear you, I hear you, I hear you, and I'm here. I'm going to validate your expression. I'm going to validate how you're feeling, but you are heard. And a lot of these children with ASD and maybe who don't use words, maybe don't often get to really even just feel that first thought of, oh gosh, you're hearing me. So if they come in, and even if they're starting to play the drum and it's very energetic and it's very enthusiastic, we can take that same energy and I can reflect that on the piano. And it's just, I'm here. All right, we're here. Like we're energized today. And it's just that we're it's the meeting in the music that young person or whoever it is, like, you hear me. Okay, you're with me. And then we can get into the work. Then we can start, improvisationally processing what is it that's causing you to be upset today, or if there's trauma, and just really help them process that over an experience of just rewriting experiences, relationships. Working with that transferential relationship is really important when working with a child who maybe can't speak. And that's where, I know it's a little bit off, but we get supervision, as do yourselves, I'm sure, every month, just to talk through that relationship, what's happening in the relationship, because a lot of it happens in the music, but it's also in that transferential relationship with the person. So yes, I suppose if we'll first meet a client or a person, and we will usually meet with them for 3 weeks. And then we'll begin to create our goals and objectives. For those who are able to speak and communicate through words, they'll create the goals with us. So for example, if it is a rehabilitation, it might just be to purely developmentally use music and rhythm to help develop your walking again, or to develop your gross motor function. Again, that'll be more a goal that you'll agree together. If there is someone who is processing their mental health, again, it could just be as simple and as broad as we're going to talk about our emotions, or we're going to help process these inner turmoils that are happening. And Or if you're in an SEN school, sometimes it might just be developmentally. We want to work on communication skills. We want to work on gross motor skills, fine motor skills, even just building attention spans so that they're longer than just 4 seconds at one activity, but just expanding that to maybe 30 seconds, or to build it up even to 2 or 3 minutes where they can attend to an activity and their heads just aren't racing all the time. So after about 3 weeks, that's when we'll typically think about our goals and objectives for the sessions, and then we will meet then continuously for about another. The average length of session is about 13 weeks in total. But, there are some clients that we work with, I've worked with for years. There's some that's shorter than that. It just depends on the person and what the need is.
On a weekly basis?
A weekly basis, yeah.
Okay.
Typically on a weekly basis.
And again, the length of how long you spend on each of those weekly sessions with a person will depend very much on how they are, how they're feeling that given day, their attention span. I'm imagining it's not set in stone that it's 50 minutes or whatever that might be.
That's it. Yeah, okay. We typically allow 50 minutes, do the clinical hour we talk about.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But so it's usually we do, just because in order to structure your day, we do allow the clinical hour. But, for some children, it might be 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's just they're ready to leave, and if we were to encourage them to stay, it would actually be disruptive to them.
Exactly.
It just depends on the person, and again, it depends very much on who you're meeting with. Again, if you're with someone in rehabilitation, they might do a little bit longer, or again, it might be a 10-minute session. Just we're going to focus on this part of the body, and we're going to use rhythms and drums and movement to try and build up those motor skills again. Or if you're with someone with dementia, 30 minutes is usually the what's the word? Anyway, the kind of 30 minutes is as much as they are able to kind of be attend for.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just different for everyone. But yeah, we typically allow an hour for each, session. Okay. And then allows us time to do our notes and clinical write-up. Just like yourselves, we'll have to create a record of everything and have a clinical record of it. Otherwise, HCPC will be after us.
But it's so good, isn't it, for us as well as practitioners regarding what therapeutic approach we're using, our own processing, our own reflections too, isn't it, in those notes, I think. So I've got so many questions that I wouldn't even barely know where to start. Would you mind, could we just come back to, let's say you're working with somebody who is non-verbal. I love the way you describe that first meeting, and I really understand that sense of meeting somebody where they are at and mirroring that with them and creating that relationship. If somebody in that sense is non-verbal, I'm used to interpreting somebody's language, whether they are explicit in what they are saying, whether they are implicit. And of course, we're used to sort of translating in a way silences too, aren't we? I'm a firm believer there's even different types of silence, if that makes sense. So is it similar for you that when you meet that person, albeit they are non-verbal, that you are attempting in some sense to interpret what's going on for them? Am I making any sense in that question?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do, because it always has to be an interpretation, because they can never verbally confirm it, and even if they could verbally confirm it, we're always even interpreting our own selves. But yes, I suppose that's where the psychodynamic theory would come in, and the theories of psychoanalysis. We will be observing, and I suppose we're always asking questions. We're always internally asking questions as for example, what instrument did they pick up? Was it a large one that maybe showcases potential confidence, or is it a quiet instrument that won't even be barely heard? Then how do they play it? Do they play it aggressively, loudly, forcefully? Do they pick it up for 30 seconds, 10 seconds, and fleet to another one? Or do they play it, with more expression? You're always just asking these questions of what does that mean, or what can that mean about their unconscious processes? What can that mean internally about their inner world and how they view the world? How does this person interact with me? Are they aware that I'm in the room? Are they seeking to initiate an interaction with me? Are they seeking to make music with me? And then when we do make music, it's about how is their music connected to mine? How is my music connected to theirs? Are they aware that our music is connected? For example, even just leading and following, do they lead in the music? And if they lead in the music, it could showcase a whole range of things, but can they follow as well? If I was to do a little motif, would they follow that? Would they pick up on that I've said something in the music and they've heard it? Would they pick that up? Because that talks about forms of empathy and that awareness of another person, and just the desire to listen, that, you have something worthwhile to say. I actually also have something worthwhile to say, and in the music we're listening to each other and making room for each other in the music, and then also, with the likes of attachment, how is that child? Do they see me as a secure base? Do they see me as a person of safety, or are they very much keeping themselves and their music to themselves? That it's this insecure attachment to me. Oh no, Vis, you're not safe. Or is it they'll come in real close and we'll make music and it'll just be a real back off? It's just, we're always asking questions and interpreting, the position they are in the room, the instruments they use, how they interact with the instruments, and then how do they interact with the therapist themselves. And those are all the questions that we're asking while casually trying to make music with them and draw them into a musical space. And that's very much with a non-verbal child. Like, for example, we were working with a child the other day. Whenever when we started working, I would ask a question, and we were actually co-leading this with another therapist. There was two of us. It was when we would ask a question that, as in a choice of instrument, the child just, you could see the anxiety rise in them and just the overwhelmness of being asked a question by these two adults. And as the weeks drew on, they became more and more comfortable with answering those questions, and instead of just saying yes, 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 or not really making a choice, but it was just this automatic response out of fear, just this fear response. Yes, yes, whatever you need, whatever you need me to be. Over time, we hope, well, from their behaviors changed to actually they began to say, actually, I don't want that. No. And I know they weren't maybe using as much verbal, but it was the actions of them were speaking. But through doing, I know it's a little bit different, but through them, we always do an initial assessment before we meet, for example, a child in a school, and we got an understanding of their background at home. And we understood that the parents had separated, and there's an awful lot of voices trying to get them to pull them in different directions. So in the music, when it came out, there was this seemingly, I don't know how to please two people. I don't know. Yes, okay. But it was this panic almost, because they were looking at both of us, and it seemed that there was this fear that I can't be what you both want. I can be what you want individually, but I cannot be what you both want together. But they don't have a means to express that verbally. So we have to make these interpretations in the music and how they're responding to us as practitioners and in the music, and just give them almost a corrective experience that actually you can, just be yourself, and that is pleasing. Your decisions are pleasing, whatever you decide to do, and just reaffirm every decision they were making in the music, no matter how small it was, even if it was just changing the instrument. It was just this affirming and validating their expressions.
That's such, a wee example. It's such a powerful account, reminder of the weight that some of the children around us carry in their lives, in their little hearts, and not knowing what to do with that, not knowing how to translate and communicate that. And here you are, using music as the language through which they can communicate, whether they have language as a skill of their own or not. Music is that language, isn't it? In your work, I'm really understanding that better now, and that's just such a brilliant example. I'm thinking of the email you wrote to me. You described it so beautifully. You talked something about, again, particularly about non-verbal people, and you talked about the weight of emotion attaching to their soul, as you put it, and how difficult that can be to process. And so to channel it through that music, through those instruments,
but it's so easy. Well, it's not so easy. Sometimes it's easy to forget that when you're working in an SEN school, and it's very much about development and progression and reaching the next target, reaching the next milestone. It's very easy to forget that each of these children have a soul, and each of these souls can have experiences attached themselves. They can have trauma attached themselves, and it's easy to overlook that when we're very, not always, but in education we can be quite focused on development. And a lot of the time our development can be stunted because of what's attached to our souls, and it just gives an outlet for these children to process what's it like to be separated from a parent, what's it like to have a bereavement, what's it like to live in care. Because unfortunately, a lot of our children do live in care because of family breakdowns and whatnot. And there's an awful lot of loss, even just the loss of being able to speak, the loss of being able to be in full control of your body. If you have other dystonic movements that you have no control of, there's so much emotional attachment that comes from living with a disability or ASD or whatever our young people live with, that sometimes, or often I should say, can get overlooked in an educational framework when the focus is on development.
We talk a lot, don't we, about seeing somebody, seeing a person and seeing their lived experience. But I think I really understand what you mean, that needs to include an emotional life is included in that. And again, like you say, somebody with a disability of whatever sort, or who is non-verbal or ASD or whatever that might be, that their emotion lives in all of us. And it's not just seeing that person and seeing what they're bringing, what they have in their life, but it's seeing that emotional life that they're living too. What an extraordinary job that you do. It's sort of, I can only speak for me personally, but it very much feels like a Venn diagram of course there are similarities in the work we do, but it almost sounds, and maybe it's just because you're so brilliant at describing it and are so passionate about it, but like there's this added layer of depth to it somehow when you bring music into the equation and this whole other language that you're using to build that relationship, which sort of, if it's okay, Stuart, leads me on to another question that's in my head. So you talked about around sort of 13 sessions, again, very much depending on the person you're working with. What about endings in music therapy? So of course we all know that endings are something that we manage very carefully and very sensitively in therapy. Is that any different in the work you do? Or again, I'm thinking particularly with somebody that's non-verbal and you've built this relationship. Is there anything different that you might do in music therapy to manage those endings when you know it's coming close?
A lot of the time our endings would have to be more visual response to an ending. For example, working with children, you can have little chains and you take off a chain at the end of a session, and as you get close to the top there's getting less and less chains, and you can make a song about it and the song's getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and then hopefully there's a communication of sorts that we're coming to the end that these chains were running out of sessions, that were coming to a close. That's one way that we can tend to do it. But yeah, it can be tricky to communicate an ending to these children who are maybe more profoundly disabled. It's just a little bit harder, but we try our best just to be as visual as we can in the endings, and just, we do speak it too, and we just let them know we're coming to a close, and in the weeks ahead, much like yourselves. But we try as much visual representation as we can.
Oh, that's so interesting. And do you mind me asking how that is for the practitioner, for the therapist, for you, your colleagues, knowing that and again, we all acknowledge for ourselves we have our own unique relationship with a particular client or person that we're working with, and we work through our own endings through supervision or whatever with that too. But when that's not always possible in that very explicit way with a client that obviously you're describing, does that have a tendency to leave for you to come away and that sits with you? Or is it sort of par for the course in a way, and it's just something that you understand is in the nature of the work?
No, it very much can. Again, it's person specific, but yeah, I think it can be really... it's come to an end, and especially if you're not even, sometimes if you're working, there are times when you do ask yourself, like, what, like, did that create a corrective experience, or did that help support them in whatever way? Did it, and you're left with these questions, like, I suppose in a lot of times, with all of us, we're just left questioning. But especially if it's a child that maybe doesn't fully grasp the ending. And so sometimes if I'm in a school, I might even pop in and say just a wee hello, just to say that I'm still here, and about, and there's no reason why they can't be re-referred or whatever, but just to kind of keep the relationship going, but in a very different context now. I don't know if that's more for the child or for me, but I do think it's maybe beneficial for both of us. But just to say that he's not gone, he's here and he's dropped in to say hello. So no, I wouldn't do that with all the people that I work with, but just for those that I feel it's appropriate with.
Yeah, I understand. And there are families involved in the process too, Stuart?
So some of our work can be helping mummies and daddies, show them different ways of communicating with their child. So mummies and daddies maybe who have a non-verbal child, for example, may be a little bit at a loss for different ways to interact. It's maybe more of on a screen or more of on a flashy toy, but just using very, very basic principles of body movement, voice, singing, and in like just being that mirror to your child, that they can see you, that oh, you see me, and they can communicate that way. So we would do a lot of work with parents in that regard. And then also if there's been a bereavement in the family, or if there's other things, there are times when families want to come together. And so we've talked an awful lot about improvising, which would be to me at the core of music therapy, but there is also songwriting. So that's one of the things we can do for children who maybe do talk, or for adults who want to explore through songwriting. It's a little bit more maybe accessible than just picking up an instrument and playing, is to write a song together. It could be writing about a loved one, it could be writing about an experience, it could be storytelling and role play. And again, we'll be looking at all the unconscious processes of why did you choose that story. We'll be then with that type of client, you can ask a little bit more interpretive questions. So you can say, oh, I noticed that you've written about this and this. I wonder what brought that into your head, or why was that in your head in this scenario, or why did you choose that instrument to reflect this person in the song? So you're using, again, it's centered on the music, but you're always asking those questions. There's a few other things there. I suppose there's four. They talk about four main interventions, and I've talked about improvisation a lot. Songwriting would be the other one that we do, and then there's music it's receptive music. So it might be listening to music, listening to songs. Imagine a 17-year-old lad who comes to a therapy session. He might not want to pick up a drum or a maraca, but he might actually be like, actually, I was listening to Meatloaf this week, or I was listening to this. And, it's a way of just building conversation. Like, well, tell me, what are you listening to there? If you had to pick a song right now, what would it be? And then they'll maybe select a song, we listen to it, and then we just ask questions just to get to know a little bit more about them. So what brought that song to your head? Just a bit of lyric analysis. I noticed that the lyrics were about this. What does that maybe reflect in you today, or how do you perceive that? And it's just using music as a conversation basis then, and then all your theory will begin to kind of play out through that. And then the last one we would do is recreation, and that's recreating familiar songs. For example, if you're with a 17-year-old lad, and then he actually gets to this where he wants to play the song, or there's a certain song that means a lot to him, it reminds him of a person or a time, we might play that song together, and then reminisce or talk about it. It's using music as a tool, but having that very therapeutic understanding that everything that comes into the music and out of the music, there's an awful lot. Music can bypass a lot of our defenses, and a person might just be picking a song, but when you begin to unpick those unconscious processes and get them to think, why did I choose that song? What about it? Why did I want to do that? Or why did I pick a drum and play it that way quite aggressively when I was role playing this person in my life? And you're just really supporting them to look at their own, I suppose, behavioral outputs and see what's on the inside driving that. What are my motivational drives that is pushing all of these faucets? So music, it's a tool. We would call music very much our tool and what we work with, but it's surrounded in that theory of psychoanalysis.
And maybe I just wondering, you're making me reflect on something I said earlier, and I talked about how listening to you, I get a sense of, I shouldn't say more depth really, but a different level that you're reaching perhaps in somebody. And I suppose, again, it just comes back to perhaps what music is. I think most of us, regardless how much we may or may not be into music, will understand that there are tunes we put on when we're happy, and there were tunes we'll put on when we want a bit of a cry, and there were tunes that remind us of certain times of our lives, and sometimes we'll want to listen to those a lot, and sometimes we don't want to hear those because of the triggering effects of them. So even on a really basic level like that, I think most of us can understand how music connects us to a part of ourselves. And for you to be using that as a tool and exploring all of that meaning and all of that, psychoanalytic, psychodynamic approach to music in that sense, it's just fascinating. I could ask you questions for hours. I've barely scratched the surface, and I'm sure you barely feel the same. But you've done, like, you've described it so brilliantly, Stuart. Thank you so much for opening that up for those of us that might be unfamiliar with it. Are there, I don't know if this is a bit of a rotten question, are there any particular resources or further reading or somewhere we can signpost people to if they wanted to learn more about this?
Yeah, so there's a really lovely book that I think is a really good insight into the power of music. It's called This Is Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin, or Levitin. I'm actually not sure how you pronounce it, but it's This Is Your Brain on Music. And it really just looks into how music affects your brain, how music affects your emotions, and how it even affects your personality, and just how music is so intertwined with you as a person. So it's not necessarily from a clinical perspective, but it just gets even questions asking yourself, like, oh, what music am I listening to? How is it affecting me? Or what's the drive? Or how is it linked to my own emotional capacity right now? Just as you were saying there about how we use music therapeutically all the time without even realizing it. But it just goes he takes it a little bit further and says it actually impacts your personality, it impacts your brain, and it's all intertwined. So it's a really, really fascinating read, just as a general read, never mind from a therapeutic clinical side.
Yeah, brilliant. And just out of interest, if anybody's listening to this, they might already be a counsellor or psychotherapist, but wanted to go on. Perhaps they're thinking, well, I play grade 7 or 8 piano or something like that. And actually, I'd never thought, would they still then go through the training that you've already described? Do you think they would just apply in that usual sense to one of these MA courses, and that would be how they would perhaps?
So that's it's music therapy. We're very blessed to be protected in the UK. So you have to have done a course, one of the prescribed courses, in order to get your title as a music therapist. So yeah, if you're a counsellor or a psychotherapist and wanting to develop even your approach, there are some courses out there that gives you a further insight into music therapy. But to actually use music therapy as a title or anything like that, it would be through one of these master courses. Yeah. But you'd have a heck of a lot more understanding before you'd even begin.
Yeah, I understand. They'd be starting off from a different place. Yeah, of course. And what about you? What about when you step out of work mode and you need to decompress and you need to exhibit some self-care, look after yourself a bit? What do you do in that time? Are you listening to music yourself, or do you prefer a bit of peace and quiet?
Yeah, I actually prefer quiet. Or, well, my preference would be instrumental music. I find lyrics and music to be quite a lot, actually. So, see, my go-to self-care would be instrumental piano music. And that's when I just relax. Read a book. My wife got me into this genre, romantasy, which is fantasy romance. And I'm taken to it by storm. I'm a real romantic at heart, and just a wee bit of magic thrown in there, it just brings both sides of me alive. But yeah, no, to relax and fully just unwind is put some instrumental music on and read a book. Yeah. Get away from reality and get into a fictional world of magic and romance.
So is it a bit of escapism and something sort of peaceful, quiet, and soothing and calming?
That's it, yeah. Or a spa, one or the other. But one's a little more accessible than the other.
Is there anything else that you feel you'd like anybody to understand or to know about your work? Or do you feel you've sort of, as much as we can in the course of an hour's conversation, do you think it's pretty much covered it all?
Gosh, I suppose one of the things that comes to mind is that in this country anyway, people see music therapy as a form of entertainment or a way of just engaging people. But just knowing that we do have that clinical side to us, I suppose we're always trying to promote that we are a clinical therapy within healthcare. But then on the other back of that, there's also this view that it is just for children, or it is also just for people with SEN. But no, it's just that it's so encompassing, because as you talked and we've discussed, music is so encompassing for us all. It allows really all to come and to take part. So I suppose that would be the only thing. But yeah, no, I think we'd probably need another hour or two to really get into other depths of it. But
we'll have to have a follow-up episode or something at some point. But honestly, it's a really good point, and I if it's of any reassurance, I think you have got that across really well. That at the heart of all this, there is sound therapy and therapeutic knowledge that is being used, but again, that music is the tool, is the conduit through which you are building a relationship and you are understanding somebody else's emotional life. So, I think you've got that across beautifully. I think if anybody's listened to this and come out of it thinking it's just like you say, a form of entertainment, then they've clearly not been listening properly. But thank you so much for that. And I know you've taken your lunch hour out, bless you, to do this. So I really appreciate that, Stuart. So I will let you get back on with your day.
Rob, Faye, lovely to meet with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Stuart for joining me today, and thank you for listening in. If you would like to explore more about music therapy and the work of Stuart and his colleagues at Make a Melody, links are provided in the show notes below. This podcast is brought to you by the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, a professional home for counsellors, psychotherapists, and over 120 wellbeing organisations across the UK. Autonomy, diversity, creativity and community are at the heart of what we do. We are creating a positive space for conversations with people who share common beliefs and goals, because together our voice is louder. If you would like to know more about the NCPS, please visit www.ncps.com for more information. And please remember to follow and subscribe so you're always part of the conversation.